The podcast series Ensemble All Together is a corporate content produced by CBC Radio-Canada Media Solutions Revenue Group. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or position of CBC Radio-Canada Media Solutions.
Hi everyone, welcome to our first CBC English episode of Ensemble All Together, a bilingual podcast series where we aim to share, discuss, and facilitate real and authentic conversations in the space of DEI and the media industry from multiple perspectives. Proudly brought to you by the Media Solutions team at CBC and Radio-Canada. I'm Ruchika, Bindra, and I'll be hosting this episode. I currently work in the world of brand partnerships and custom sales at CBC Media Solutions, and have previously lent my time on camera, hosting a community show across the GTA, and being a host for a South Asian Canadian podcast series. My passion lies in having authentic conversations that need to be shared and having all our voices unmuted. Joining me today are two impactful guests in the space of media and advertising who are going to help me dive deep into some real conversations on today's episode. Where does the media industry stand in the era of diversity and inclusion? My first guest today is Nick Davis. Nick was raised in Mississauga, Ontario, and has worked in both radio, television, and print for over 33 years as a reporter, TV, and radio host, covering everything from current affairs to arts, and has won many awards for his work in journalism, including a 2006 Gabriel for a story he did on Holly Jones. Nick has also lectured on journalism at Ryerson University, Seneca College, Sheridan College, and Centennial College. Nick has been with us at CBC for over 25 years, starting off as a national reporter in sports, moved on to be then a senior producer of Metro Morning, Toronto's local morning program, and then he went into program development, where he was responsible for the ongoing development of local programming across the country. Nick then worked as the Director of Engagement and Inclusion and currently is our Executive Director of Equity and Inclusion at CBC. So welcome, Nick. Our second guest today is Kevin Johnson. Kevin Johnson grew up in Etobicoke, Rexdale, Ontario, and has held previous senior roles with both Havas and Carrot. He has worked at Mediacom for over 13 years, where he joined the Group M agency, Mediacom, in 2014, first as a Chief Client Officer, before being promoted to CEO in less than a year. Kevin has been appointed CEO of Group M Canada since 2021, which made him amongst the very first Black CEOs in the North American media and marketing industry. In addition to leading Group M's operations within Canada, which include agencies like Mindshare, Wavemaker, Essence Mediacom, as well as programmatic audience company Access, Kevin also serves on Group M's North American leadership team. Kevin also supports charitable organizations in Rexdale that help support and provide youth in the Rexdale North Etobicoke area. Welcome, Nick and Kevin. Hello, guys.
Hello. Good to be here.
Absolutely glad to be here.
Thank you guys for lending us your time, honestly.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you guys ready to get into some real conversations about the media industry, where we're at and where we need to be?
Well, I don't know if you're ready to hear it. That's the other part. That's the challenge.
I think we need to become. I think our audiences need to. I'm just going to start, asking you both. Kevin, I'll start with you. What do you think was the turning point or the moment where the industry realized that representation needed to change in the content we're producing? Is it a realization that the audience won't just start for non-representative content? Where do you think these discussions have started to get as real as they are in the last few years?
Well, look, I think there's been a number of things. I believe that the whole George Floyd incident definitely put a fire and lit things up in a different type of way. But I think that there are two other things that really played a role. One is you're seeing a lot of pressure from the diverse community, particularly as we think about content creators, producers, that whole segment of our industry right now is really adding pressure to the industry itself in order to get better. I think the other side of it that is pushing where we want to get to quicker is the whole idea of the effectiveness of content. And so when you think about when we grew up,
Right.
I'm saying we because I think we grew up at the same time, but when we grew up, we would look at ads coming in, and there was we were never pointing at the screen or listening to the radio and saying to ourselves, they look like us, or they sound like us.
Right.
We weren't represented when it came to ads. But because data and insight is now driving the effectiveness of content, we're able to see very quickly how consumers are connecting with a particular piece of advertising. And that's really important because now the effectiveness of content is driving who and where we're meeting these individuals. And so now we're seeing that there is an appetite, an idea of making sure that we are authentically connecting with content. And I think that's the other thing that's driving this.
It's funny you say that about the advertising world. Like Kevin knows my brother's in that world too, and he's been in that world for a very long time. And I remember the very first commercial I saw. I remember it like it was yesterday, where there was a mixed couple. Well, at least not a couple, but a black woman and a white woman in a commercial together. It was about a car commercial. And it was Chevy, Oh What a Feeling. Like that's how much I remember the commercial. And the car comes up on this bridge. It stops. It's a Chevy. You don't know who's in the car. And then when it stops, these two women jump out and they go, Chevy, Oh What a Feeling. And it's a black woman and a white woman. And I thought, holy mackerel, there's a black woman in this ad. It's still in my head to this day. And you're right. And I can't imagine the fight that whoever created that ad had to have back in this was probably the late 80s, early 90s, to get that black woman in that ad. Because I never saw another one for a very, very long time after that. You know what I mean? Right. And you're right, though. I challenge you today to watch television. And if you see an ad that doesn't have a person of color or a person with a disability in that ad, it's almost every ad has mixed couples. And you're right. And what is driving that is data. Like you see now that if you put people who look like us in an ad, we're more prone to buy that product or to visit that store. And it's so they can see it now. And so you're right. So the world has changed. And I think I would even say before George Floyd, because what George Floyd incident did was, to me, it gave a lot of people a voice to speak up.
You know, it's interesting. When I was at MediaCom, we did a study, and it was analyzing the effect of the George Floyd movement, not just on the Black community, but the racialized community.
Yeah. Right.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
And so what came out of that, it was really clear how that the racialized community in totality really rallied behind the Black community because they too recognize that this could be us.
Yes.
And all of the feelings that they had about around mistreatment, about racism, all of that was coming up and really rallied in that moment. And so the other piece that came out was specifically the racialized community in Canada wasn't like the U.S. They weren't prepared to just cancel a brand. But what they were willing to do is, if you give me another option or alternative, I will take my business and go somewhere else.
And I think now brands also know that there has to be authentic representation. You know, you can't just checkmark putting somebody in because they have to. And I think that's still the struggle, right? Of where do you fight tokenism and make it real?
Well, it's a really good point. And I will say, though, even though in spite of what's going on in the world today, I still think there are people who the gesture is still about making money, not about actually
representation.
And in the process, though, I think we as people of color and people from equity-deserving groups need to take advantage of the opportunity in front of us. Like whatever reason you're going to put me here, I'm going to show you that I'm going to knock this thing out the park, and I'm going to be so good at it that you won't have to question it anymore. But there's still a bit of that where, we're doing it because we're trying to be more inclusive. That's the word, trying to look at, make sure that we're making sure we respect the people who do it. It's authentic. But even the attempt at being authentic, to me, isn't done sometimes for the right reasons. You know what I mean? And But I don't care what reason why you're doing it. I'm suggesting that I would like to take advantage of that and show you that you may not have thought 5 years ago that I could be an executive director at this company.
This is also a new muscle.
Yep.
Right? So we'll take the checkbox until it happens so frequently that we get ourselves into a running form. So I definitely don't think that for a moment we can be like, okay, let's question the cause of what's happening. We just have to get to a point where we demonstrate the benefits.
Yes.
Of it happening.
100%.
We're going to tell better stories.
Empirical data.
Yeah.
I mean, there is empirical data that shows the more diverse your organization is, the more successful it is. And in the advertising world, that can't be more true.
Oh, of course.
Because at the end of the day, if we're telling stories around the people that we are trying to connect with, it is the population that we see in Canada. And what does that look like? Every color, every shade of skin, hundreds of different countries that people have come from. And so surely we must be able to reflect that in order to be able to create these great stories that we need to share. One day I was driving from work, and at that point in my career, I had the opportunity to drive, a nice luxury SUV. And I was on my way from work. I had a presentation that day, and I was in my suit, feeling good about life. And perfect example of this. So a car drives just in front of me, and there's a black boy playing with his toys in the back seat of the car. And our eyes just connect. And I saw the biggest grin on this boy's face. And it was like 5-10 minutes that we were just looking at each other and laughing, and he was smiling. And the connection that we felt, here I am talking about it, and I never said a word to the young man, but I could bet money that he saw someone dressed a certain way that he typically hadn't seen before. And I felt good because I was adding something, and he felt great because he saw something. Maybe it was, someone that he wanted to be when he grew up. Like, I don't know what, but it's that connection and idea of seeing someone that looks like you in a position that is just, it's still very new for us as children of immigrants.
Right.
Yep. And that's where I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper in both your childhoods, because I know you both have come so far in your careers. It's an inspiration. So can you, maybe Kevin and Nikki, just share a little bit about how your childhood might have impacted in some way to kind of where you are today and the work you do? Or maybe it doesn't. I'm just, I want to know and understand.
My childhood, I grew up in a very, I would call it a black neighborhood, the first Ontario housing neighborhood in Mississauga. And we didn't have a lot. I was often hungry. I mean, I remember the very first job I tried to get was in the food industry so I could get food. So I could literally, I'm not even joking. So my very first job at 15 was at McDonald's. Like, I just needed to get a job where I could eat because we just never had food. I never went on a school trip. It's an unfair world. And so how do I navigate what I feel is a very unfair world? My mom actually worked 3 jobs, you know what I mean? And so she was never around. We literally had to raise ourselves, you know what I mean? Because she was just never around. And when she was around, she was tired. And don't bother her because she's got to, get ready to go to this next job. So, we learned really well how to be self-sufficient and how to find for ourselves and how to figure things out. And those are the things that helped me in my entire career, all the way through.
There's so many different points of commonality. Mm-hmm. Single mom, family of 5, government housing, Ontario housing, likewise, growing up in Rexdale. It also strikes me as we talk about some of the challenges that we've had to face as Black men, how income and economics play into that as well.
Right.
And there's an intersection that is really interesting when you think about, the color of our skin and some of the challenges that we had from a dollars and cents perspective that really made things really challenging. I grew up and still am in a very strong faith-leading home, and I really struggled moving into Rexdale and having to just do whatever it took to survive, and it was at odds with my faith.
Yeah.
Struggled, and I didn't have, at that time, a father that I could sit down and try and figure this out. And my mom, too, worked multiple jobs, so we were on the streets figuring it out.
Yeah.
And there is not a lot of good that can happen from a child just being on the streets without any guidance.
Where do you see kind of brands now when they're working with you, or when you're kind of working with brands? What are the kind of conversations you're seeing? Where are they looking at, selecting content or working with, publishers and broadcasters that have that? Or is it sort of a reminder you're doing? Or what is kind of the strategy that you like to at least guide them to?
Look, there's a lot of good things that are happening at Group M.
Yep.
The first thing that we did is we created a program, a pledge, the 2%, which is we rallied our clients and we said to all of them, and just to think about the scale, we're talking about $1.8 billion of advertising dollars that we spend into the market. So we went to all our clients and said, listen, we want to start spending at a minimum 2%, specifically around Black-owned and diverse media owners, products, etc., to help really get us to that level that we should be, that we're trying to work on right now. It's actually called Launchpad. And so what Launchpad is that we've created a program, a 12 to 16-week program. We train them. Wow. We pull people in from diverse communities, so the whole socioeconomic thing that we were just talking about, and we train them and we give them a job immediately after. They stay within our organization and start working without one penny out of their pocket.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
When we're talking to clients, I would point to a great example like Molson. So Molson goes out a couple of years ago and they do the 7 languages of hockey. Mm-hmm. Oh. So for those who don't know, they've taken like the most prominent languages in Canada, and they create a broadcast for Hockey Night in Canada. Mm-hmm. And so now you're hearing Cantonese, you're hearing all of these different languages that are truly reflective of who we are. Mm-hmm. And you think about who watches hockey. Everyone watches hockey. I grew up as a Jamaican home, shoveling snow and running in with the firewood to watch Hockey Night in Canada. It is who we are. And so I think when we move out of the box like Molson has and really thinks about who they're speaking to, that's powerful. That's real enough that we can talk about it today.
Nick, what about you? The kind of work you champion and the work you do, what you want to see more of, or what you are proud of where you've come so far, and, pioneering and championing certain changes, I guess.
Well, I mean, around 7 years ago, we started the program called DEL, the first Emerging Leaders program at CBC. I'm super proud of it. I started it when I was in news. And the idea was we're trying to find a way in which we could create a pool of people who our senior manager could say, hey, those are people who have leadership training, have leadership potential. Because when you look at our company, which is, a very diverse company, you rarely see that at the leadership level. When you get to a certain level, it just kind of stops being as reflective or as representative. And the question was why, you know what I mean? And so when we looked at some leadership programs that were being offered here, first you had to be selected by your manager to go into a leadership program, like just particular ones, like to get into the higher levels of leadership. And there weren't enough people from equity deserving groups who actually held those positions to even be selected to go to these leadership programs so they can actually become senior leaders in the company. And so we thought that was a problem. So we audited all the leadership programs, me and a woman named Sandra Porches. And we realized that there's very few people of equity deserving groups in any of these programs. So we created one called Dell. Right. And it wasn't met with a lot of love when we first presented it at all, and people thought it was wrong and that we were now excluding other people from leadership courses. And so we had to get past all that. But in the end, after 7 years of it and seeing so many of the people who've gone through the program sitting in leadership chairs and in this company, I think it did well for us company in terms of at least identifying potential leaders. Now, not everybody who goes through the program becomes a leader. Right. And that's not the intent of it. The intent of it is to get rid of the excuse that there's no people here who are good enough to be leaders from those groups. And I think we've done that. And I think it's one of those programs that I'm super proud of. And the other program I'm really proud of is a program called Inclusive Newsrooms. It came from one of the women who ran the Montreal shop. Her name was Helen Henderson. And the woman who ran the Ottawa shop at the time, she's now the senior managing director of Ontario, a woman named Ruth Zaudu, a black woman. And Helen was a white woman, and they said that in both their shops, which were very reflective of their audiences in terms of who worked there, somehow their voices weren't being represented in stories. There was little inclusion. They thought we had lots of representation and no inclusion. And again, the reason why was, and they felt that in the leadership roles in news, the people who decided what stories we're going to cover and how we're going to cover them, Helen said to me, there's no people of color in that room. And she said, so we can't get rid of them all, but can we all teach them the value of inclusion? So we created a program called Inclusive Newsrooms. Those programs are designed to help senior news leaders understand what inclusion is. So it's not representation, what inclusion is, which is where we have people at the table who are making those decisions and that their decisions and their thoughts are being respected, taken seriously, and it's valued, it's wanted, and it's actually showing up on areas. And when we did an audit of Montreal, was the very first group to go through it. The change in the space of a year of how they told stories was remarkable.
And it reminds me how powerful, moving from the idea of mentorship where you're kind of inspiring and then walking away to sponsorship. Mm-hmm. And I didn't actually know what the difference was. I thought they were the same, actually, until our parent company, WPP, had a sponsorship, a group that they were sponsoring. And so my role was to sponsor a woman of color. Mm-hmm. And so what really impressed me is the idea of sponsorship. It was no longer, hey, listen, you can do it.
I'm here for you.
Here is what I would do. And, hey, listen, maybe I'll see you sometime. Best of luck. And so once I signed up, I was just like, whoa, like, I'm accountable. Now it was like, okay, how do we make this happen? Right? And so I think if we can employ more of those type of ideas across the industry, then you really have a bunch of people, individuals, who are truly committed to change and getting someone from A to B. And ideally, B is a management position so that we can begin to tackle some of that challenge of not seeing it at a certain level, which we too face. Yeah. How we start tackling some of those challenges.
So well said. I remember when I entered Dell, I was like, what's it going to be like? Is it going to, you don't know. You're like, is it a session where you're all just talking about problems? And I walked out of that. It was so emotional because you were listening to everyone and you're like, oh, you felt it too. Oh, that happened to you too. But it wasn't okay, let's put everybody on a crying session. It was, you still have a voice. This is what you need to do as a leader to find your voice. Like your experience in your childhood brought you to it. How do you get there? And the relationships you made. It's like you made a community with people across Canada that were all willing to be there for each other. And I think programs like this or support or, the Launchpad, it's so needed. Yeah. It's so needed to feel like there is a light in the tunnel for me.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that we also need to share is that it doesn't stop.
But where would you find your peer? Like, where is the other Black CEO male in this country who you can sit there and commiserate with and talk. So it's like I used to do with host, right? Like, so the host of a radio show, I remember when Matt Galloway got the job hosting Metro Morning. You know what I mean? Black man hosting the show, largest show in the country. And he used to always say to me, like, he would come sit at my desk and talk to me every day. And I'm like, okay, well, what's up? And he goes, but he really had no one to talk to. He had no one who he could sit down and who's been through what he's been through, can experience what he's experienced, understand what he's going through. And so I always ask people like yourself, like you used to ask Matt, where do you find that? Because it is lonely. Like, trust me, I know.
People ask many times, where's your mentor? I didn't have one. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are two parts of that. One is, there were none. Period, end of story.
Nick, how do you measure the success of an EDI initiative? Like, are there key metrics, or how do you look at it and say, okay, this is working?
Well, it all depends on what it is we're working on. So first thing, I'm trying to get my team to understand that we're not doing projects. We're trying to do systemic change. We're trying to do structural change. And so if it's a project that has a beginning and an end, it's very easy to measure metrics. Right. So when you think about something like Dell, okay? People tell me that the metric is, well, did these people get jobs as leaders? And I said, well, that wasn't the intention of the program. So then how do you measure success? Well, I measure success in the program for something like Dell is when we get at the end of the program, when we hear back from the participants, we talk to their bosses, we find out if they've been more productive in the workplace, if they've been useful in terms of helping move that group forward in the way it thinks about the work that we're doing. Has the person developed personally? And have they found their voice to advocate and speak for themselves? That, to me, is successful, okay? If they get a job as a leader, that's a bonus. And I say to them, well, how do you measure success in the other leadership programs here? Is it because people get jobs ahead or not? Or do you even ask that question? And I found out that they don't ask that question. They only ask it of our program, because there's always seems to be a higher bar for programs like ours. Like somehow, well, we got to find out. Well, yeah. And then when they actually go look at the metrics to see who's gotten promoted or elevated in their position, well, it's all over 65% of the people who went through Dell have been promoted. But that's actually not our measure of success. Our measure of success is, have we developed that person in a way in which they go back to work, where they're working, feel better about who they are, can advocate for themselves, have they built a network of people who can support them in their own development? And if we can answer yes, that's been successful.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Yeah, I think for us, there are a couple of things at play here. One is the result of Launchpad and being able to have, I think the number now is 35. This program was started last year. Have 35 individuals working and building their career, actively building their career, is a great stat in itself. I think the fact that we are, working towards, as the 2% pledge, you're talking about potentially $400 million invested into diverse-owned media. I think when you move away from that into our organization, we are still working, admittedly, around specific metrics. We are looking at, but they're not going to be soft, and I can promise you that, because we're not celebrating over the fact that we already have a very diverse organization. It should be.
Yes.
Absolutely.
What we need to get excited about, and you mentioned this earlier, Nikki, is I want to be at some point, our organization can stand up and proudly say that our executive team and our leadership teams reflect the population of Canada in terms of its diversity. And we're not there yet. We're working on it, but we're not there yet.
And I'll even add to that, okay, around, let's say, something like the program that Kevin's talking about, right? His Launchpad program and our Dell program where we're trying to build better leaders. Is it successful putting them there, or is it successful for them to be there for a long time and keep the door open for others? Because the piece is we open our tent to allow more people in, but how are we supporting those people once they get there?
Right.
Like, how are we supporting that Black woman or that South Asian woman who you have now gotten an opportunity through Launchpad to get a really good job or good position? And it's because you're not there. Like, you're not, like, And how do we support them? So we built into support mechanisms. So, some people say, well, successful, this person got a job. And I'll say, well, it's only successful if they not only got the job, but they stay in the job and that they've somehow benefited us. And so how are we supporting them? And I know we put sometimes leaders of color and people with disability in positions to lead, and we almost put them in a position to fail because we have not built the supports around them because the person who's above them thinks they only got the job because they're a person.
Nick, I do believe that this is also about check boxes and in a good way this time.
Yeah. Right.
Because here's the thing. I mean, there are so many layers in that. There's so much work to be done.
Can I just say one more thing
Absolutely,
about
Nikki.
Like the systemic change and that type of change we're trying to make? Because it happens kind of in the background and people on the floor don't feel it quickly, so they think you're not doing anything. But I will say this about systemic change. That's about behavioral change and it's about cultural change. And if you're trying to measure the metrics on that, that's so hard to measure because it's just, so we've tried to create a tool to help measure behavioral change. I think it's pretty rudimentary. We've used it a few times, especially in inclusive newsrooms. We've used it a couple of times. And it's good. It's a good tool. But until our culture changes, okay, very rarely will behavior change. Because when you have cultural change, people now have to be accountable. We have to agree that this is how we are going to interact together. This is how we're going to behave together. These are kind of the rules of participation in this particular group.
Guys, we've been talking so much, and there's a question I was holding till the end because, I smile when I say it, but I'm sure you both have heard this word a lot in your positions, EDI fatigue. So, Nick, now we're hearing this word coming that, EDI fatigue is a real thing. People in certain companies across, or different organizations, different industries feel there's a sense of EDI fatigue coming, an extra hyper focus on this. And then there's someone like me who's like, we just started, So where do you, especially in your role in the equity diversion group, like how do you tackle this? Do you hear it a lot?
Well, I hear it. And it's not said that way, that we're tired of doing work in this space of equity and inclusion. It's said in different ways. Like, I'll give you an example. So there are some big companies last year had to make cuts. Like there's Amazon and all these huge companies had to make cuts. And where do you think the first place they cut was? They cut that work in that space. A lot of equity and inclusion professionals, lost a lot of their jobs in the last quarter because they don't say it, but it's, well, we don't need this anymore. Or if our budgets are too tight, since this is extra work, we don't need to do it anymore, right? Then you hear it in the way where people say, I don't have time to do the work that's involved. And I'm going, well, it is the work. So I don't understand what you mean. And so someone said to me the other day, well, I don't have time to do that because I'm too busy doing this, whatever it was they're doing, putting together the news. And I said, but how are you putting together the news and not doing it through a lens of equity and inclusion? So I'm not asking you to do 5 stories. I want you to do the same 4 stories you do every day. I want you to do those same 4 stories, though, through a lens of equity and inclusion. So I'm not giving you extra work. But when they say that, what the reason is they're tired of hearing it. That's the kind of way of doing it. Like they don't say, I hate the work. You know what I mean? Or when they say, like what someone told me the other day, I think we're good. I think we've got this thing down pat. Like we're good. Like I don't think we need any work in this space anymore, so I'm going to redirect my efforts into something else. And I say, really? Okay, well, what do you mean? Well, tell me an example of what good is. And they try and explain it to me, and I'm going, okay, well, that's not good. Like, it's just not good. But I understand, though, for people who have never, because we are focused on this work, and we've been very focused on this work in the past 3 or 4 years. We know that because the industry has grown, the opportunities to get great jobs in this field has grown, lots of more funding and budgeting has been thrown behind initiatives to make their companies more inclusive. Absolutely. Even here at CBC, we know that. And so we know it's growing. And of course, but it's again that thinking where people think because I'm focusing on this, that somehow I'm ignoring that. And I say, no, it's not. Because in my world, in equity and inclusion, there's something that's happening in that space that requires us to put focus on it.
It is a new muscle, as we said before.
Yep.
And I think we also need to educate that group and remind them why we're doing it and what it means and what it doesn't mean, to your point. And recently we had the conversation about DE&I versus anything else. Mm-hmm. And the understanding that if you start with inclusion, equity and diversity happens.
Of course it does.
And I think it's really important because many organizations are still in the DE&I space, when in fact, if you started with I, that's all. And therefore, you're beginning to build and do some work around equity and diversity.
I will even tell you this. I took the word diversity out of our title of our department intentionally. Because when you say diversity, they think you're only talking about people of color.
Interesting.
When I say diversity, I'm talking about white people,
everybody,
black people, people with disabilities, people from the LGBTQ2+ community. I'm thinking about I'm not thinking about, but every time I use that word, it's kind of code now for people of color.
Right.
And I'm saying, no, that's unfair. So that's why I say it's about equity and inclusion. And I'm not actually allowing you to use the D word in my title anymore, because you're right. We get focused on that, and the point we need to be working on is inclusion.
Yeah.
And where people feel valued here, feel like they belong here, then they're going to tell their friends a great place to work. It's really good to happen. Then when we value people, they get the promotions they're supposed to get, they land where they're supposed to land, and everything is better. And we need to get to that space. And we are a long way to go as a company where we can call ourselves truly an inclusive company. Of course, we have inclusion in spots and pockets, of course, right across the country. But to be truly inclusive as a company, we have a ways to go.
Does the work ever end? No.
Well, I don't think it. I wish I lived in a world, where my department didn't exist.
Yep.
We should be in a world where we care about people, and we value people, and we understand the value of having different lived experiences at the table. We understand the value of telling other people. So I wish we lived in that space.
But I think
have to have it.
But I think our intent, we meant well. But I think what you're feeling now, the fatigue, is primarily based off the fact that we went into the D right away,
without just
and not
inclusion.
the I, right? Like it should have been, hey, listen, we want to be more inclusive, and that means for this group that is maybe in the corner that needs a little bit more love, we're going to call them to the front.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, I know exactly
Versus, hey, we're going to give $1 million to the black community.
Yes.
That's why we're feeling the fatigue right now.
Or we're going to run another program where people feel excluded from. Like where my white counterparts feel like, well, why can't I apply to Dell?
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's a very good question, but we actually don't have a problem with white leaders in this company.
Yeah.
As executives and as leaders of organizations, there are different groups that are challenged right now that need help. And there's some really large challenges, but think about a challenge like this that we would never, ever, ever know about. But does it affect their productivity? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Does it affect their way that they interact with their peers? Yes. We really need to stop, understand, listen about the experiences for all of the communities that are under siege and under challenge right now.
Really well said. Thank you both from the bottom of our heart, the entire Media Solutions department. Thanks you both.
Thank you. It was fun.
You're welcome. It was fun, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Anytime, my friend.